My name is Ivy Myers and I'm 32 years old. The smoke alarm woke me at 2:47 in the morning, and by the time I got my shoes on, the hallway outside my apartment was already black with smoke, so thick I couldn't see my own hands in front of me. I don't remember running down 4 flights of stairs. I don't remember the cold concrete of the parking lot under my bare feet, because I'd lost my shoes somewhere between the third floor and the street. I just remember standing there, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, watching orange light crawl up the windows of the apartment I'd lived in for 6 years, and thinking that everything I owned was turning to ash while I stood there breathing. The fire department got it under control before it spread to the neighboring units, but my apartment, Unit 4B, was gutted. Everything gone. My grandmother's quilt, the photo albums from my wedding that never happened, my late father's old record collection that I'd kept in a milk crate since I was 22. Gone. I sat on the curb wrapped in that blanket for almost 2 hours before I even thought to call anyone, and when I finally did, the first person I called was my mother. She picked up on the fourth ring, groggy, annoyed that I was calling so late. I told her what happened, that my apartment had burned down, that I had nothing, not even a change of clothes, and that I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, in the flattest voice I have ever heard come out of her mouth, "Not our problem. You should have been more careful." And then she hung up. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen, waiting for it to ring back, waiting for her to say she was joking, that she'd be there in 20 minutes with a thermos of coffee and a spare set of clothes. The phone never rang again. I didn't have the energy to be angry that night. I was too busy shaking. Too busy watching firefighters walk in and out of the building with axes and hoses. Too busy trying to process the fact that everything I'd built for myself had disappeared in under an hour. A woman from the Red Cross gave me a voucher for a motel 3 blocks away, and I spent the rest of the night lying on a stiff mattress, staring at a water stain on the ceiling, replaying my mother's voice over and over. Not our problem. Should have been more careful. As if a fire was something you could outsmart. As if I'd left a candle burning on purpose. 2 days later, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as Grant Holloway, a fire investigator with the county. He asked if I could meet him at the building so he could walk me through what they'd found. I remember thinking that was strange, that investigators usually just filed a report and moved on, but I said yes because I needed answers. I needed to know how my whole life had ended up in a dumpster outside a burned-out building. When I got there, the smell hit me before anything else. That wet, charred chemical smell that clings to your throat. Grant was standing near what used to be my front door, holding a clipboard, wearing a county badge clipped to his jacket. He was maybe 45, gray at the temples, with the kind of calm, measured voice that made you feel like whatever he said next was going to matter. He shook my hand and told me he was sorry for what I'd been through. Then he asked me a question that made the hair on my arms stand up. Do you know who had access to your apartment in the last week? A friend, an ex, a maintenance worker, anyone with a key or a way in. I told him no one, that I lived alone, that the only people with a key were me and my landlord. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they already suspect the answer isn't the full truth. Then he said the fire hadn't started the way most accidental fires start. It hadn't started in the kitchen, or from an overloaded outlet, or from anything I owned. It had started near the back bedroom window, in a spot with no wiring, no appliances, nothing that should have been able to ignite on its own. We found something at the scene, he said, something that doesn't belong in a normal house fire. He reached into a folder tucked under his clipboard and pulled out a clear evidence bag. Inside it was a small, half-melted object, and the moment I saw what it was, my stomach dropped straight through the concrete beneath my feet. My mouth went dry. My hands started to shake. Because I recognized it immediately, and I knew in that instant that this fire hadn't been an accident at all. The object in the bag was a keychain, half-melted, the metal warped and blackened, but I would have known it anywhere. It was a small silver charm shaped like a fox, a birthday gift I'd given my younger stepbrother Weston 3 years earlier, back when we still spoke, back before he'd asked me for $12,000 to cover a gambling debt and I'd said no. I hadn't seen that keychain or Weston in over a year. I told Grant this, my voice barely above a whisper, and he wrote something down on his clipboard without looking up. "There's more," he said. He explained that the fire had been started with an accelerant, Something poured deliberately along the base of my bedroom window, and that the burn pattern was inconsistent with anything electrical or accidental. Someone had gotten into my apartment, poured gasoline near the window, and lit it, then left the keychain behind either by accident or, Grant said carefully, as a message. I asked him what kind of message a person leaves behind when they burn down someone's home, and he didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. I called my mother again that night, my hands trembling so badly I could hardly hold the phone. I told her what the investigator found, what they'd pulled from the wreckage, and I asked her straight out if she knew anything about Weston being near my building. There was a silence on the line that told me everything before she even said a word. Then she admitted it, in pieces, the way people do when they've been caught and are trying to make the truth sound smaller than it is. Weston had gone to my building the week before, she said, because he needed money and thought I might have cash hidden somewhere, some emergency fund, something he could take without me noticing. He hadn't meant to burn the place down, she insisted. He'd only meant to search it. But when he heard my neighbor's dog barking and panicked, he knocked over a can of paint thinner he'd found under my sink and, in his rush to cover his tracks and destroy any trace of himself, he'd set it on fire deliberately, thinking a small fire would erase the evidence he'd been there at all. It became something much bigger than he expected. I asked her how long she'd known. She said since the morning after the fire, since Weston had shown up at her house shaking, telling her everything, and she'd told him to stay quiet, that it would blow over, that I'd never find out. That was the real reason she'd told me it wasn't her problem. She wasn't being cold about a random accident. She was protecting her son from the consequences of destroying my home, my belongings, every physical piece of my father's memory I had left, while I stood on a curb in a stranger's blanket with nowhere to sleep. I gave Grant everything. The keychain, the timeline, my mother's confession, all of it. Weston was arrested 4 days later and charged with arson and burglary. My mother wasn't charged with anything, since knowing after the fact isn't the same as committing the crime, but something between us broke that night that I don't think will ever be repaired. I haven't spoken to her since the day I handed her name to the investigator. I think about that phone call constantly, the one where she told me it wasn't her problem, and I understand now that she meant something different than I first thought. It wasn't that my burned apartment wasn't her problem. It was that protecting her son from what he'd done mattered more to her than protecting me from losing everything I owned. I'm rebuilding now, slowly. I found a new apartment 2 towns over smaller, but it's mine, and no one has a spare key to it except me. I bought a new lock, a security camera, and a fireproof safe for the few photographs I've managed to reprint from friends who had copies. Some nights I still smell smoke that isn't there. Some nights I still hear my mother's voice, flat and dismissive, telling me it wasn't her problem. But I've learned something about myself through all of this, something I didn't know before the fire took everything. I don't need anyone's permission to start over, and I don't need anyone's approval to protect myself from people who were supposed to love me. If this story moved you, if you felt even a fraction of what I felt standing on that curb watching my life go up in flames, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like mine deserve to be heard, and there are more coming, real stories about betrayal, family, and the strength it takes to rebuild when the people who should protect you turn their backs instead. Subscribe now so you never miss the next one.